What's up everybody, this is the Dwarven Dispatch, and we are going to be doing a little video tutorial on how to paint your forest starter set in an Ice Caverns theme. Now the forest starter set comes with a gnarled tree, a small conifer, it comes with the hollow hedge, wild wolfsbane patch, and a wyvern skull cairn. And today is September the 10th, 2022, and it is currently in stock unpainted for $53. This is such a great piece that you can get if you are just trying to jump in and have a little easy canopy, some scatter terrain, and some things that just kind of look nice. If you might have missed the big Kickstarter for the Wildlands, or if you missed the limited Wildlands restock and are just trying to get your hands on a few pieces. In the bottom left corner of this frame, you can see an Ice Caverns trifecta piece. And if you notice, it's got it looks pretty white, but underneath of that is this base coat that I'm kind of mixing up now. And that base coat is a 2 to 2 to 2 to 1 ratio of Bubbles Blue, Basalt Blue, White, and a little bit of base gray. And that's going to go on all of the stone pieces that you're going to see here. I'm also going to be painting some chasm pieces. And I think those are just excellent pieces to have on hand, because the chasm, what it does is it allows you to utilize some negative space, and it looks like, obviously, you'd be falling into a chasm. I mean, there's not really a better way to describe it for you. But anyway, I've mixed that up, and as you know, I always like to use a swatch just in case, I might have to go to lunch or do something later and I want to come back. Maybe your paint's dry, you have to remix it. When you have a swatch like this on a loose piece of cardboard, it's really easy to come back, mix your paints up, and adjust up or down to make sure that you have the right color going on. Okay, and for everybody, just so you know, this is I believe it was a seaweed green that I used for the base of all the foliage there, and base wood by Picorni Paints. So, alright, without further ado, we kind of get into it here. So right now, what I like to do is kind of do a little bit of a heavier dry brush of this base coat. And when I do this, as you see, I'm trying to leave some of the voids so that you can see some of that excellent detail that the master sculptors over at Dwarven Forge have put in. And in order to achieve this effect, so you're not going as heavy as I did on, say, the wood pieces there, or some of the foliage that is going to be covered up a little bit later. What you need to do is you need to make sure that your brush is effectively, I'd say, about 89% dry. You don't really want anything on there that's going to leave a big, thick lump of paint on your piece. You really just want the pigment, almost like just the powdered pigment that's left on your brush after you've, almost completely dried it off. And then I just hit it with kind of a little bit of a base coat here, so that I'm getting good coverage, but I'm not covering up everything entirely. When you do cover up everything entirely, like I said, you're going to lose some depth, you're going to lose some detail, and it's just going to look like a big old mass of paint. And to be honest, you can kind of see that that's what I did on the stump itself here. And part of my thinking there was that, of course, I'm going to come over the top with some dry brush, and so that's actually my dark layer. And I didn't really want to leave too much by way of voids on the stump itself. To me, it's not as interesting as the stone pieces in terms of the detail that I want to kind of draw attention to, draw the eyes into. All of this beautiful foliage that they put down there, little lumps of moss. I believe this one has like a cool little beetle up at the top. I'm about to reveal it right now. There we go. You can kind of see him popping out. There are a couple little ferns. And I know, you're going to have to suspend your disbelief a little bit, just like you would with anything else while playing Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder or whatever your game is that you're using this terrain for. But suspend your disbelief a little bit. Kind of imagine, if you will, that there was like a flash freeze, right? Or some kind of ice dragon flew in and hit it with a borealis, and all of a sudden everything is just covered, and your party might just be standing there, the travelers trying not to freeze to death while they encounter whatever it is that created this, flash condition. Maybe it's some kind of layer action that comes over the top and just freezes everything quickly. So there's still this foliage, there's still this moss, but it is effectively, turned into dry ice, right? Okay, so now you see that I have pretty much covered this piece up, and just trying to make sure that I don't dirty all the other pieces around, cross-contaminate too much here. But you get the idea. Now, this is one of the smaller stump lumps, obviously the same sort of thing. Not really much to say here. I think I went a little bit lighter, and by lighter I mean this brush is much drier than the other one. And so whenever that happens too, if you notice like, oh my god, I've got to make 30, 40 passes at this thing before I even get any of the pigment off there, what you're going to want to do, of course, is reload that brush. And if you've been using like a spare piece of cardboard to do that, you might not actually have to dip back into your paint. You can just go straight over to the cardboard. It might still be wet enough for you to be able to load up your brush with just the right amount of pigment, so that you don't cause yourself any real trouble there. All right, I'm trying not to make it so that we're just sitting in total silence between kind of takes here. I'm not really big on using audio or music in between. I'm not really sure how to navigate that. If you can't tell, I'm effectively brand new here to YouTube and just wanted to put out a couple of videos every now and then on these alternate paint schemes that come up every once in a while, and maybe a couple of videos about Dungeons and Dragons that just help folks out who might be new to it, or a lay person to the overall tabletop gaming and want to jump in without having to watch 40 or 50 videos that explain all the nuances and details of every single class and every single feature and every feat, and so all right, here's a little chasm piece that we're going to get into. I think these are really cool, these chasm pieces. And again, I think these might still be in stock on the store. Might be able to find these, of course, unpainted. And, a lot of people like buying painted stuff. Obviously I like buying painted stuff too. But if you have an inkling that you want to do something a little different, custom, paint scheme, definitely get that unpainted. You're saving yourself a ton of money. And really, you're only limited there by your imagination. Okay, so at this point, I am going to be using some interference blue and basalt blue in effectively a 1-to-1 ratio in order to paint some of the what they call thoughtful touches that the sculptors had put in for people. So as you see, I painted that little bud over there, and now I'm just painting this cool little blue beetle. The poor guy, hopefully when things warm up, he will survive. I don't know, if he's like a cockroach, he might be able to survive. I have no idea. But I'm going to try to do him some justice. He's there, he can't help it. We're going to make him pop out at least a little bit. But maybe he won't get stepped on. Maybe he still has a chance. I don't know. we'll see what happens with this guy. But, you know, when you're painting these kind of thoughtful touches, and you're like me, you're not a, you know, painter by trade, or this isn't really your forte. I mean, I think this is like the second or third set of this stuff that I've decided to paint, and I certainly don't have a lot of experience, which again is why these videos I think might be helpful for other people who may be intimidated by the concept of painting. You know, I'm thinking I'm doing an okay enough job here. And it doesn't have to be perfect. And all of these little details too, just so you know, right, they're something that you can enjoy, you can kind of look at and catch, but it's not, you know, once you get all the dry brushing done and all the layers have been built up, you're not going to notice all the little tiny imperfections that are on each piece. So that's something to keep in mind. You don't have to be super intimidated about painting this stuff. You know, it may, I mean, you know, I'm making mistakes all over the place. It's totally fine. It's going to get covered up. Your players aren't going to notice. Your friends aren't going to notice. It'll be all good. Okay, so I am now just painting these cute little pieces of fungi that are growing all over the place. I don't know if these are really the kind that you're going to want to eat. Probably kill you and your party. Don't do it. Whatever you do, avoid it. Yeah, and I find too, I don't know about everybody else, but you're at your job, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, you're making a buck, you're hustling, whatever it is, right? But you can kind of relax and zoom out a little bit and find some time for yourself to enjoy a real easy, peaceful kind of hobby. And I think Dwarven Forge is that. Certainly painting is that. It's just something that allows you a little bit of time for yourself to relax, to get into something different, and to, you know, have an alternate timeline running parallel to your, you know, day-to-day, what you're doing. You know, where you're planning ahead for something that isn't a presentation or, you know, inventory or, you know, a big event at work, something of that nature, right? This is, okay, I'm planning my game, I got my players, everybody's coming to the table, you know, what are we going to do next, where are we going to go, and, oh, you know, it'd be really cool to have like a kick-ass kind of area where, you know, they're going to get into some ice caverns and there might be some trees there. It might be a transition out of the wilderness. You know, just Dwarven Forge allows you to kind of do that. And when you're painting it, you really can do whatever you want to do, right? You're completely untethered to, you know, your day-to-day reality, right? It can be whatever you want it to be. And so I've now mixed up some Interference Violet with some Alizarin Crimson Hue by Golden in a high flow acrylic, with some Basalt Blue in a 2-to-1 ratio, and this is almost kind of like a little bit of a dry brush. I put some white in there as well. As you can see, this is not quite as plum as it would be if you were doing, say, an Underdoom paint scheme. Instead, this has become a almost like even a darker lavender. Not English lavender, maybe like the larger Mexican lavender that you get, you know, more frequently. All right, and so I'm not really being too cautious here. I'm just hitting everything. You know, to be honest, when you're doing these thoughtful touches, there's some really, really wonderful painters on the Discord channel. I mean, there's way too many to name, but one that I recently saw that was just killer was Imes, so or IME, right? Her swamp set was awesome, and where I'm going with this is there are obviously more pieces in here that are just getting totally covered up. But if you poke around on Discord, you'll see there's people who really take time to make sure each and every one of the elements on a little piece like this is going to have its own spotlight and its own color scheme, and I think that's just incredible. For me right now, I just wanted to kind of get this done. So of course the moss is being blended in with these kind of tentacle things, and it's going to be blended in now with these ferns. Um, you know, and the moss and the fern and this foliage down here, it's all kind of getting blended in together, and I think that's totally fine. But definitely poke around if you would like, and on the Discord, and you will see some really cool, really inspiring stuff. And again, you don't want your brush to be super saturated either. You want to make sure that this is effectively a dry brush. And one thing to note too, if you haven't watched any of the other videos, anytime you're using like an interference paint, you really, the darker the base color, the base layer that you're using that interference on, or if you're mixing it, the darker the color you're mixing it with, the more iridescent those pieces are going to be. And the more that the sheen that you're going to get is going to be, readily apparent and noticeable. So say for example, later on in this video, you're going to see I add a little bit of interference pearl by Golden. And when you add that interference pearl, it's almost kind of like a silver, right? It's a little more opaque. It's not as obvious. But when you're doing the darker colors, as you can see, this interference blue and this interference violet, it really kind of pops. And, interference blue over black is effectively what you're seeing when you see Wyverstone. And, of course, that stuff is just killer. It looks incredible. One of my other videos as well, I did what people have called the gray skull green paint scheme. And I used an interference violet there over some of the stones. And I thought it looked great. Okay, so now I'm going to be moving on to the gnarled tree and trying to add some little points of interest. I think there's a couple of pieces of moss on here that end up getting painted. And I gotta love that autofocus. Yeah, just a couple small touches, nothing crazy. There's no real, no reason to get nuts here. I think there's only like one or two pieces of moss on this tree in terms of quote unquote thoughtful touches that have been put in. And just so you're aware as well, I also went ahead and in the little boot, the owl boot, or I don't know what you call it. I call it a boot because I'm from the desert, and that's what you call like a bird who's made a hole in a saguaro cactus. We call that a boot. What's it called? Like a hollow inside of a tree? That's what I'm talking about. I went ahead and painted that with the interference violet as well. Okay, and now I'm doing the same thing to this little stone piece. And this is I think it comes with like a trap. It's almost like a little trip wire. Okay. Now, as you know, if you watched some of my other videos, I like to always go over everything kind of with a lighter dry brush first, and then kind of come back and hit it with a heavier dry brush just to finally accent those other, those finer details that are in there. When you're doing the ice caverns, you're pretty much using all white paint. But I think that, white paint is nuts, right? So in like the purest form of white, it's the light reflective value is so high that it's just blinding, right? And that's that. I think it's a titanium oxide that they put in there. And you want to kind of knock it back. And so adding a little bit of cavern dry brush to this white paint makes it much more palatable for the eyes, much more tolerable. Okay, so yeah, as you can see, this is like, I'm just doing a little bit of a dry brush. And I think this one, yeah, see, there's pretty much nothing. It's just a little bit of pigment on this brush. And I'm trying to go pretty light. And I'm not exactly sure. I think this, at this point, things move along fairly quickly. So I'm not sure what is going to come in succession by way of cuts and where we're going with this. But effectively, you need to know that you do a lighter dry brush like this, so everything gets a little dusting of snow, so to speak. And then I'm going to end up coming back over the top of it with a little bit of a more loaded up brush. The brush is going to be a little wetter, and I'll effectively use like the edge of the brush in order to give that final touch and final effect and hit all those raised edges with some really nice highlights. And again, that's not on this step. So again, what you're seeing here is just a little bit of a lighter, I'd say this is kind of heavy, to be honest, but still lighter dry brush, where you're just picking out some pieces. You're kind of just coming up over the top to highlight those raised edges and not go too nuts, right? Okay. I have no idea what I'm doing at this point, but I think that overall, when you do it this way, you just have the piece is a little bit more interesting and has a little bit more depth. I think that's with anything that you're going to be working on, and I apologize as well. It looks like some of these some of the subject matter made its way out of frame, and I will work on that so that it's not so horrendous for everybody. Okay, what's going on here is a little bit of a heavier dry brush that I've done on this hollow hide, this little evergreen hollow hide that you see. And the reason that I end up doing that is so that it has some really good coverage, but also leaves a lot of that foliage, and you see a lot of the depth. I don't like to completely cover up the foliage, if that makes sense, with something like this. I think that plants are living things, and they have their own energy that they're generating, they're breathing. They're going to be a little bit warmer, especially if they just got flash frozen. They're still going to be putting out a little bit of heat, right? They're not totally cold, and I think that this is the right look, right? You want to still be able to see the green. You want to still be able to see the wild wolf's bane kind of at the top. And okay, so now what I'm doing is hitting it with, like I said before, like I like to do a lighter dry brush, and then I come over the top almost with like the edge of the brush with my brush a little bit with a little bit of a wetter brush. And what I've done here, though, that's a little bit different, is I am using Interference Pearl by Golden. to add like a little bit of a shimmer, almost like a silver shiny shimmer to all of the leaves. So you can kind of see that, ice is formed, and just make it a little bit more interesting and aesthetically pleasing to look at. So keep in mind as well, obviously the camera doesn't really do a great job of picking that kind of thing up. You might be able to notice it. And I'm doing the same thing here with that final dry brush. As you can see, the brush is wet by comparison to how it was earlier. You're loading it up a little bit. I think I'm picking up a little bit of that interference pearl as well and adding just a little bit here and there. See, that's really heavy. It's a little bit almost too much. And that's, honestly, it doesn't really matter. It's fine. If you can see in the top left corner of this frame, that's the actual cavern piece. You barely can make out any of the undercoat there. All right, so this one I'm going a little bit heavier. Obviously, no big deal, but I do believe that I added a little bit of pearl to that. Okay, and so now this is a straight chasm piece. So this is all stone. It will not have that same icy pearl to it. This is just the straight touch of Cavern's dry brush added to some white. But this is the heavier dry brush that I end up doing, so that you can kind of see that. And this should effectively match up nicely. Yeah, there you go. Obviously, I'm extremely critical in terms of. I feel like my eye can be really discerning. Yours doesn't have to be. I'd say my base coat is a little bit darker than what they put on those chasm, on the actual ice caverns that are done at the factory. But I don't think most people would notice, and it's totally fine. So no point in stressing out about it. And which is a good segue, right? Because one of the greatest, chillest public television oil painters of all time, Bob Ross, used to always paint these lovely trees. And whenever I've got like a conifer like this, and I'm kind of hitting it with that pearlescent dry brush, I get the image of Bob Ross stuck in my head. Okay. And here we are now shifting back over into the final product. As you can see, there's a little bit of that pearl coat. You can kind of pick it up there in the center. It almost looks silver. We've got our chasm pieces. That is the trifecta piece. Here's some gnarled trees. You didn't see me paint the gnarled tree on the final coat, but you can kind of see what's going on here. I don't think you also saw me do the skull, the wyver skull cairn. Is it called a cairn? I don't know. Cairn. Yeah, you can kind of pick up a little bit of pearl. I wanted it to have that effect, that kind of look. I think these are great. And I think this set, again, if you are just trying to get into Wildlands, I think this is a great set for you to kind of start off with. And that's it for this video. If you have any questions, please leave a comment. I'd be happy to interact and connect.